When I was 15, I had my first girlfriend. We lived in an upper-class area, very quiet and peaceful streets. My girlfriend Casey also lived 2 blocks away, so I could walk to her house almost nightly. One Thursday night during break, when I had nothing to do, I started my walk over to Casey's house. It was on the later side of the night, but I didn't really have a curfew, so it didn't matter. But pretty soon, I thought I could start hearing noises from around me. And when I say around me, I mean mostly behind me. The first time I heard it, it was the sound of a bush being shaken a bit. I only turned my head to look for a second without stopping. I just started to walk a little faster is all. When I got to the next block, I heard another noise, a twig or a small stick cracking. I stopped this time and turned around. All I saw was the empty street and the bushes that lined up along each property to separate the sidewalks from people's properties. Basically next to the street was a wall of bushes, and I didn't see anyone or anything that could be making these weird sounds. I picked up the pace even more, and I was reaching the home stretch to Casey's house. Of course, there was another sound again, this time more like footsteps. Quick, light footsteps. I turned again without stopping. No one, nothing. I could see Casey's house now. I called and she picked up right away. I told her how freaked out I was getting because I kept hearing noises. I walked around the bushes surrounding her driveway and stepped onto her property. I noticed her staring out her bedroom window upstairs. She waved at me as she left on the phone, and I waved back. Then she asked me, "Who's that guy right behind you?" I turned right around and saw a fully grown man crouch walking maybe 10 feet in back of me. I screamed and ran for the door and started pounding on it. The man grabbed me and tried to put me in some kind of headlock, but he let go and ran away pretty quickly. Casey's mom opened the door with a look of dismay on her face. She let me in and slammed the door shut as Casey came running over. I was out of breath and felt like my heart was beating 1,000 beats a minute. Casey's mom hugged me, asked a few questions, then called the police to warn of a dangerous man going around town. Casey's mom let me stay over that night for obvious reasons, and she drove me home the next day. It was a dangerously stormy night. Everyone in my family was doing their own thing. I was in my room watching TV, my parents were in the living room watching some comedy show, and my sister was playing video games upstairs. I usually enjoyed stormy nights like this because it made me feel relaxed. I was relaxed until there was a monstrous bang on my window. I jumped up and looked outside. There was someone outside my window, but the large amount of rain pouring down the window kind of blurred his face. He started pounding at my window. It sounded like he was screaming for help. I opened the window just a crack, and he screamed in, "Let me in, I'm hurt." The rain was so loud I had to scream at him to come around front, then I shut my window. I ran outside to the living room to tell my dad that some man who seems to be in distress is screaming for help outside. And then came the knocks and shouts for help outside our front door. My dad was about to open the front door, but I stopped him. I said wait, because I wasn't sure if it was a good idea. Then the phone rang, and on the TV it displayed the caller ID of our next door neighbor. My dad ran to pick it up. When I heard him say "no fucking way," I knew something was wrong. He hung up the phone and said stay away from the door. He didn't explain why. He just went to the window to peek at the front stoop. There is where he said he saw a guy crouched down, pounding on the door, holding some kind of large, sharp tool. My dad yelled through the front door at the man to go away before the cops get here. Then he actually got on the phone with the cops. Eventually the man outside gave up, and he disappeared the next time we checked. When my dad was on the phone with a neighbor, he told my dad that he saw some homeless-looking guy rummaging through his shed and came out with a large chopping axe. The cops found the crazed man wandering around the streets, and it made it in the newspaper a few days later. One night when I was a really young kid, I was in the living room watching my favorite cartoon. I had the TV pretty loud, but I thought I could hear my mom calling my name from downstairs. I called back, "What?" She didn't answer, so I guess she couldn't hear me. I heard her call me again, so I went down to the basement. The lights were off, so halfway down I called for my mom. She didn't answer. I didn't know where she could be calling me from, but one thing was for certain though, she wasn't in the basement. I started going back up the stairs, but before I even got to the top stair, I heard my mom's voice again from down in the basement calling my name. I looked down into the pitch blackness. I ran back up to the top step, turned on the lights, and walked halfway back down, peeking into the basement. I didn't see my mom anywhere down there. Suddenly, I got a huge rush of horror. I ran up the stairs basically crying for my mom. She came rushing down the stairs from upstairs, and I cried to her that something was calling me from downstairs that sounded just like her. She swore to me that she hadn't been calling me. She went down to the basement to check and make me feel better, but I didn't feel better. I'm sure she didn't believe me. Why would she? I was a little kid. But I still know that I heard what I heard. My grandpa recently told me a story. It was about a night he took his dog for a walk. He used to have a small Boston Terrier named Sherry, who he named after an old friend of his who passed away. My grandpa lives like 2 hours from us on a farm, and there's not much that goes on there. He lives with his wife Marianne, who he married like 15 years back. Every day, Marianne would take Sherry for a walk in the morning, and my grandpa would take her for a walk in the evening. On a regular walk during sunset, my grandpa was walking Sherry down the usual dirt path that ran along the woods next to their property. My grandpa passed by another person on the trail who Sherry instinctively barked and pulled towards like most dogs do when they see strangers. My grandpa said hello to the stranger, who had a large hood up, but the stranger just walked past without even batting an eye, so he and the dog kept walking. Sherry kept looking back every so often and barking, however. My grandpa would tell him to shush and yank at the leash to keep him walking. Eventually, my grandpa would turn around to look at what Sherry could be barking at. The stranger who passed him by a few minutes earlier was stalking him from behind a tree in the near distance. My grandpa decided to pick up the pace as fast as possible. At his old age, he always carries pepper spray in his big coat pocket just in case. He was getting closer to the house when suddenly he heard clicks from the leaves on the ground inches behind him. But before he could turn, he felt the warmth of a glove cover his mouth and nose, preventing him from screaming or breathing. My grandpa says he could hear Sherry barking and biting at the stranger, which might have helped in loosening the man's grip a little. My grandpa says he struggled to grab the pepper spray out from his pocket, but when he did, he sprayed it at least 10 times and continued spraying it even after the man who was holding him let go and started to scream. My grandpa came as close as he could to a run to escape back to his house. He was perfectly okay. I grew up in California for the first 14 years of my life. Our neighborhood wasn't the best, namely because it was an area that the Crips were known to reside in. If you don't know, the Crips are members of one of the biggest Los Angeles street gangs. My best friend, who I always called Stevie D, lived 2 doors down. We had other friends, of course, but we would often hang out just he and I. We'd usually ride our bikes together around town or play video games, just basic kid stuff. When we were 12, we were biking around the neighborhood one night and decided to visit a well-known abandoned house. It had been uninhabited for many years because no one would buy it for whatever reason. When we pulled up on our bikes to the front of the house, Stevie pointed to the window and said, "Look." I pushed my bike a little closer to the window and focused my vision on it. I could see someone peeking out the window. I couldn't tell if they were looking at us or not, but it was definitely a person's face sitting between the curtains. It was extremely strange considering the place had been unowned for years. We stared for longer than we should have, perhaps, and noticed something else that was strange. The person didn't move their face at all. We inched a little closer, onto the empty driveway actually. Upon getting closer, it appeared to be a Halloween decoration or something, like a fake head. This meant someone had snuck into the house to put it there. Stevie D and I, being the mischievous kids we used to be, hatched an idea to sneak in through the back somehow and check out the place. We hid our bikes on the side of the house behind an overgrown bush, then snuck into the yard. To our surprise, the back door was already unlocked, but when we came to think of it, it wasn't that surprising considering it seemed someone had already broken in to put that fake head there. We stepped into the house, but we didn't want to turn the lights on and expose the fact that we were in the house. It was dark in there, but not pitch black, so we could make our way through the house. We got to the living room first because we wanted to check out that fake head thing at the window. It smelled really bad in that room though. I picked up the head from the windowsill and immediately dropped it and screamed. I dropped it not because it was surprisingly heavy, but because it also felt like real skin. I saw a dark liquid pouring out from the bottom of the head that was now on the floor. It was blood. It was a real human head. There were 2 cracks in the ceiling above us. Stevie and I looked at each other with our mouths hanging open. We ran for the back door and got back on our bikes to get the hell out of there. Anyone in our immediate area learned pretty soon that the head belonged to a victim of the Crips, who apparently placed the head there as some kind of message. I don't think anyone knew the full story, but there was a good chance whoever placed that head there was still in the house, because Stevie and I both heard cracks in the ceiling above us, as if someone was coming downstairs. Last year, a guy came to my house's door around 9 p.m. He knocked on the door, so I got my mom, and she went out to see who it was. By the way, we live in a rural area, so visits that late are extremely uncommon and strange. The guy talked to my mom about how he was opening a business, asked whether she liked American-made products, then handed her a Clorox container as a sample. He went back to his minivan and opened it to get a quote-unquote vacuum cleaner when my mom saw 5 other men sitting inside. She told me to run and get my phone since we don't have a landline. I couldn't find it, so I got my knife and stood around the corner. She threw the container outside and told them to get the hell off her property, as well as that she was calling the cops. They peeled out of the driveway and we never saw the car again. I've always been an extreme sports person ever since I was little. Mountain climbing, parasailing, scuba diving, though I've always been an avid skier. I'd go upstate skiing at least 10 times a season, sometimes with friends, sometimes alone. My friend, who I'll call Q, agreed to come upstate and go camping with me so we could do some backcountry skiing, which is basically skiing in the backcountry on unmarked or unpatrolled areas outside of a ski resort's boundaries. It was a 3-hour drive, then a decent amount of off-roading to get to where the hills were. I parked my truck at the bottom of a decent-looking area full of hills, but I also stopped there because I couldn't really drive out much further given that there were too many trees. Q and I then proceeded to unload the back of my truck of all our stuff, including ski gear and camping equipment. Then we hiked about a 1/4 mile, which was an incredible amount of work with all the stuff we were carrying. We found a perfect place to set up camp, right near the bottom of an uphill, and in a bit of a clearing between the trees. Setting up the tent and unloading our sleeping bags and equipment and such was first priority. When all of that was done, we started our hike up the hill to scout the area. We did a decent amount of hiking, but we also got a lot of skiing in. At one point, Q and I lost each other while skiing down a bigger hill. I assumed I'd meet him at the bottom, or just find him eventually. I checked the walkie-talkie just to see if he'd answer, but he didn't, which meant he was probably still going downhill. At some point while I was walking with my skis at the bottom of the hill, I ran into someone, another skier. He sounded very friendly under a ski mask, asking me where the best hills are and if we were camping and such. He had his skis strapped to his orange backpack. I pointed to the hill I just skied down and also pointed in the direction we set up camp. He said he and his wife were trying to find a good place to set up camp near other people, and asked if I could lead him to my campsite. As much as I really didn't want to trek all the way back there, I felt I had to be a good Samaritan and help this man and his wife. I pulled out my walkie again and said into the speaker to Q that I was going back to the campsite for a bit. I started to lead the man who was behind me, when suddenly I started getting some static from another end on the walkie. It seemed someone, probably Q, was trying to talk to me, but the connection was shit. Nothing I could do about that except for come back to this hill afterwards. It took a decent amount of hiking and small talk with the man before we reached the campsite. I turned around to him and smiled under my ski mask, which I realized instantly was pointless. He sounded very thankful for he and his wife. Then I finally asked him, "Where is your wife?" He didn't answer. He started to walk closer to me. At first I thought nothing of it, but for some reason, something about his skis and backpack just struck me. They belonged to Q. For a split second I thought, is this Q? Is he pranking me? But it wasn't possible. The voice was too different from Q. The man was a few mere feet away from me at this point, and he was picking up the pace to a more intimidating approach. I panicked and jumped into the tent to dig for my flare gun in my bag. The man grabbed my leg, which was sticking out from the tent, and then I felt a sharp, intense tingle in my leg, like a severe electric shock, followed by a burning heat feeling. I screamed in pain as I just managed to pull out the flare gun, push aside the door to the vent, and aim it at the man. He immediately backed up with his hands in the air, and that's when I noticed the knife dug deep into my leg. I ordered the man to tell me where my friend was. He answered quickly, saying near the bottom of the hill he found me at. I told the man to stand still while I called 911 to request an immediate rescue. But the man took off quite easily while I was on the phone. There wasn't much I could do with one single flare gun shot. I felt like I was waiting there in the cold with my bleeding leg forever, until finally the reassuring sound of a rescue helicopter swooped overhead and I shot my flare gun. I cannot believe I was actually picked up by a helicopter, in which I helped locate my friend laying in the snow in the middle of the hill. He was unconscious, and he had also been stabbed twice in the leg, then robbed. He tried talking to me through the walkie-talkie while he was losing consciousness, but the connection was bad. We both went to the hospital, but we're fine today. I lived in a small college town, and my apartment complex was walking distance from the bar/downtown area. One weekday night, I stepped out on our front porch to smoke a cigarette or two. I was up late studying. I brought my textbook with me and laid down on the stairs while I smoked. A girl who I had never met before, but who lived one apartment over on the ground floor, came home from downtown. She was by herself, and you could tell from her walk she had been drinking. She got in her apartment and barely got the door closed before some guy, who came out of nowhere, knocked on her door. She opened, and I noticed he introduced himself, which was weird because it was like 2:30 in the morning. Who comes to a random girl's apartment at that time? So I decided to stay outside and pay attention. They ended up talking for over 10 minutes. She later acknowledged how weird the situation was, but did not know how to end the conversation. He would do the creepiest things, like he reached up and stroked her hair at least 3 times, and he would try to slowly inch his way closer to her in the door. I made a point of being loud with my textbook so he would know I was there, and he disappeared as eerily as he came. We called the cops, and days later they had the girl and I sit with a sketch artist. As soon as the sketch was made public, floods of calls came in. The guy turned out to be a serial rapist who followed lone girls home from bars and pretended to be a cab offering them a ride. This girl just got lucky because she lived so close to the bars he didn't get a chance to pull the cab routine. I've only used Craigslist once in my life, and the one time I used it, I got a very sour taste in my mouth. Here's why. The guy posted an ad for a ping pong table that I wanted to buy for my roommate and I. We set up a time for me to come pick it up that night. I had to remove the back seats from my truck so that I'd be able to fit the thing. I pulled up in front of the dude's house and texted him saying I'm here. I saw the door open, so I got out from my truck and did a quick speed walk to his front door to greet him. I went for the handshake, but I don't think he saw my arm, so after a few awkward seconds I put my hand back down. He said in his deep smoker's voice to follow him to the basement. The whole house had a certain distinct smell to it, not exactly a bad or concerning smell, just a cottony, smoky kind of smell. We got to the basement, and there was the ping pong table, right smack in the middle of the room. Suddenly he said, "Oh shoot, I gotta find the paddles." So he ran back up the stairs and told me to wait right there. I waited for a while down there, assuming he misplaced the paddles and was having a hard time finding them. I started to snoop around his basement a little bit, looking at his pictures and such. It was weird. He had framed pictures sitting on furniture, but they were all pictures of just him, no family members. There was one where he was at least with a dog, but that was pretty much it. I'd say 10 minutes went by and I was still stuck waiting down there, so I started to get even more snoopy. There was a back laundry/storage room in his basement that I started to observe for some reason. There was a drawer to his utility desk that was hanging half open. I pulled it fully open, and it revealed old Polaroid pictures. But these pictures were horrific and disturbing. They were all pictures taken of some girl who was tied to a chair and her mouth covered with tape. There were also yellow folders stacked in a row next to the photos. They were labeled A to Z. I didn't have it in me to open the folders and see what were inside. I took out my phone to take pictures of the contents of the drawer and planned to send it to my friends immediately, but I didn't have any service down there. It was definitely time to go. I ran back to the door at the top of the stairs, but my nightmare only became worse finding out the door was locked. As soon as I tried the doorknob, though, I heard the deep, raspy voice of the man on the other side of the door. He was apologizing, saying the door was accidentally locked and he would go look for the key real quick. I didn't say a word in response. I examined the keyhole closely, ran back down the stairs to the man's utility desk, grabbed 3 screwdrivers of varying sizes, and tried each one in the keyhole for the door. The smallest screwdriver managed to fit in the rectangular-shaped keyhole, allowing me to turn it just enough to unlock and open the door. I didn't stop and look around. I simply ran out the door into my car. I didn't look back at the house. I simply drove to the nearest police station, showed them the pictures, gave them the address, told them where to find the photos, and that was enough for them to start their investigation. A few days later, I got all the information. The man was part of a child pornography trade on the deep web, which was how he made his living apparently. Why he decided to lock me in his basement, that's beyond me. I have not the slightest idea of what he intended on doing with me, but obviously it was not anything good. I used to babysit in my teenage years. When I was 14, I babysat for a 6-year-old boy named Cody once. His parents left me with few instructions other than to order a pizza for dinner and not let him go in their room. They also left me with an interesting comment, that Cody tends to act different than other kids and that he'll talk to himself or his imaginary friend, especially when he played with his toys. So, it was midday, pouring outside. I was watching some old Wipeout show that used to be on TV in the early 2000s. Cody was on the floor playing with his toys that were scattered across the living room. Cody kept using the name Agnes. He would act like he was playing with another kid who was sitting in front of him. One of his toys that were sitting across the room from him activated out of nowhere. I only found it weird because the toy was one of those little cube-like things with the crank where you pull it down and some simulated moving racing background came up on the screen. It was the kind of toy that would take effort to activate, and there it was, activated all by itself. I asked Cody how that was possible. He looked at me and said, "Agnes is playing with it." I have to admit, it was a little disturbing hearing him say that. I picked up the toy and turned it off. That night, in the final hour waiting for his parents to come back, I was in the bathroom washing up when there was a knock at the door. "Cody?" I said. I opened the door. Cody wasn't there. I looked into the hallway for Cody. One of the doors at the end of the hall started to creak open slowly, like really slowly. I turned off the light to the bathroom and walked into the room expecting to see Cody playing around, trying to scare me. Instead, Cody was sitting on the bed in the far corner of the room, looking at me. I asked him who just pushed open the door. "Agnes," he said. Now truly freaked out, I went to pick Cody up off the bed and brought him to the living room, where I spent the rest of my shift until his parents came back. I didn't mention any of the weird things that happened, but when they reached out to me to watch Cody again a few weeks later, I never called them back.
The Phantom Truck. Driving my truck through the quiet, lonely highways at night had always been a peaceful escape for me. The hum of the engine and the empty road stretching ahead usually provided a sense of calm. But tonight was different. The moon hung low as I glanced at the clock on the dashboard, 2:13 a.m. I was miles from the nearest town, enveloped in the kind of darkness that swallowed the headlight beams almost entirely. I had been a truck driver for over a decade, and I had heard all sorts of spooky tales from fellow drivers, stories of ghostly apparitions, phantom hitchhikers, and cursed routes, but I never gave them much thought. They were just stories, after all. With a sigh, I turned up the radio, hoping to drown out my growing unease with some music. But the radio only hissed static. Great, I muttered, giving it a frustrated tap. As I drove on, the static seemed to grow louder, filling the cab with a disconcerting buzz. I decided to turn it off altogether, preferring silence over the unnerving noise. The darkness ahead stretched on, but I tried my best to stay focused on the road. Suddenly, I saw a flicker in my rearview mirror. At first, I thought it was just my tired eyes playing tricks on me, but then I saw it again. A set of dim, flickering headlights far behind me. They appeared out of nowhere, growing steadily brighter. I squinted, trying to make out the vehicle, but it was still too far away. I shrugged it off and kept my focus on the road ahead. Minutes passed and the headlights in my mirror grew closer, their erratic flickering unsettling me. I couldn't help but glance back every few seconds. Finally, the vehicle came into clear view. An old, rusty truck that looked like it had been pulled straight out of a junkyard. The headlights seemed to pulse, casting an unnatural glow on the road. I felt a chill run down my spine. Something about the truck was off. It swayed from side to side as if driven by an invisible force. I tightened my grip on the wheel and pressed down on the accelerator, hoping to put some distance between us. But no matter how fast I drove, the old truck matched my speed, trailing me like a persistent shadow. My heart pounded in my chest as I swerved to avoid a pothole. The truck followed suit. Its headlights flashed wildly. Panic started to set in. Who was driving that thing? And why were they chasing me? I tried to rationalize it. Maybe it was just some reckless driver playing a prank. I decided to try something drastic. I slammed on the brakes, hoping the sudden stop would force the truck to overtake me, revealing the driver. But to my horror, the truck vanished. One moment it was there, and the next, it was gone, leaving only the empty highway in my rearview mirror. I sat there, breathing heavily, my mind racing to make sense of what had just happened. Then, just as suddenly, the truck reappeared, this time right beside me. Its rusty body scraped against my trailer. I could see it up close now. The cab was empty, no driver in sight. My blood ran cold. This was no prank. This was something far more sinister. I floored the accelerator, desperate to escape the phantom truck, but it stayed glued to my side. Its rusty body rattling and groaning ominously. I had to find a way to lose it before it drove me off the road, or worse. The truck's pursuit grew more aggressive by the minute. I swerved left and right, trying to shake it off, but it mirrored all of my movements with uncanny precision. My mind raced. Every act seemed to bring about a near-fatal accident. The truck edged closer, forcing me towards the guardrail. I barely managed to steer clear. My hands were slick with sweat. Every nerve in my body screamed at me to keep going, to find a way out of this nightmare. But I knew I couldn't run like this forever. The truck's presence was wearing me down, both physically and mentally. My vision blurred with exhaustion and fear. I needed a plan, and I needed it fast. Suddenly, the truck surged forward, ramming into the back of my trailer with a bone-jarring impact. I fought to keep control, sweat pouring down my face. The truck fell back for a moment, only to ram me again, harder this time. My truck skidded, the tires screeching in protest. I managed to regain control, but my heartbeat was a deafening drum in my ears. This was no ordinary chase. It was a hunt. I couldn't stop now. Stopping meant certain doom. The road was a blur of darkness and fear, my focus narrowing to the taillights ahead and the sinister glow in my mirrors. Just then, the radio, which I had turned off earlier, crackled to life on its own. The sudden sound made me jump, nearly causing me to lose control of the truck. The static was gone, replaced by an eerie, old-fashioned voice that echoed through the cab. In 1958, a trucker named Earl Wilson met a tragic end on this highway at 2:17 a.m. His spirit now roams these roads, seeking vengeance on those who dare to drive at night. My blood ran cold as the story unfolded through the crackling speakers. Earl Wilson, a trucker with a temper as fierce as the storms that raged through these parts, had died in a fiery crash after being run off the road by a reckless driver. His ghost was said to haunt the highway, his vengeful spirit possessing an old rusted truck, the very truck that was now chasing me. I couldn't believe what I was hearing, but the evidence was right beside me, ramming into my trailer with unholy force. This was no coincidence. The legend was real, and I was its latest target. The radio continued to play, the voice recounting the gruesome details of Earl Johnson's death. I listened intently, my mind racing to find a solution. "They say a spirit can be appeased," the voice crackled, "but only by those who dare to face him. To break the curse, one must acknowledge his pain and offer peace at the exact place where the original accident happened." Face him? How was I supposed to do that? The very thought sent shivers down my spine. But it's obvious that I had no other choice. If I wanted to survive, I needed to find the strength to confront the phantom trucker and put an end to this terrifying chase once and for all. Following the description of the voice on the radio, I strained my eyes to find the place where Earl's tragic accident had happened. Finally, I noticed a break in the tree line, an old, battered guardrail that had been clearly replaced more than once. This had to be it. The phantom truck somehow vanished again when I approached the spot, but I knew it was close, watching, waiting. My hands were shaking as I slowed down and pulled over to the side of the road. The headlights illuminated a narrow dirt path leading off into the woods. The road was barely visible, overgrown and forgotten by time. I took a deep breath, steeling myself for what I had to do next. With a trembling hand, I turned off the engine and opened the door. The cold night air bit at my skin, and the fog swirled around me. I stepped out onto the dirt path, the ground crunching beneath my boots. I could feel the presence of the spirit now, heavy and oppressive. This was where it had all ended for that poor soul, and where it might end for me if I didn't do this right. I tried my best not to freak out, forcing myself to speak. "I know what happened to you," I said, my voice trembling in the stillness of the night. "I'm sorry for what you went through. The pain, the anger. It must have been unbearable. But it's over now. You don't have to keep suffering. You can let go." For a moment, nothing happened. The air was so thick with tension that it felt like I could cut it with a knife. But then, slowly, I felt the weight lift from my shoulders, the oppressive cold beginning to dissipate. I could see a glimpse of the ghostly truck in front of me. It faded slowly, the outline becoming fainter and fainter until it was nothing more than a wisp of mist. I stood there for a moment longer, my breath coming in ragged gasps, waiting to see if it would return. But the night remained still and quiet. The phantom truck was gone, and with it, the curse that had bound it to this lonely stretch of highway. I returned to my truck, started the engine, and slowly pulled back onto the road. The radio was silent now. No more crackling voices, no more static, just silence. I couldn't help but wonder if I had truly escaped, or if the phantom truck would return one day to claim its revenge once more. But I knew one thing for sure. I wasn't going to drive this road at night ever again. The terror in the fog. The fog was like a thick, suffocating blanket, wrapping itself around my car as I drove down the highway. The voice on the radio had been ominous, warning of unprecedented fog conditions. Visibility near zero, the weather forecast had said, and it was no exaggeration. I could barely see the road ahead, my headlights swallowed by the murky gray. Every nerve in my body was on edge. I kept the radio on, hoping for some reassurance, but the voice drowned on about the dangers of driving in such conditions, only heightened my unease. I slowed my car to a crawl, my eyes straining to pierce through the dense fog. The road seemed empty. Occasionally I'd catch the glimpse of a ghostly shape, trees, roadsides, or perhaps just figments of my imagination. Suddenly, out of nowhere, I saw a dark shape looming right in front of me. It's a twisted wreckage of a car. My heart leaped into my throat. I slammed on my brakes, but it was too late. The road was slick with moisture, and my tires skidded helplessly. The sound of metal crunching against metal was deafening as my car collided with the wreckage ahead. The impact was brutal. My body jerked forward, the seatbelt digging painfully into my chest. The airbags deployed with a deafening bang, momentarily disorienting me. I tasted blood and realized I had bitten my lip during the crash. My hands were shaking and my head throbbed with pain. Before I could even process what had happened, Another car appeared from the fog, slamming into the back of mine. I heard a loud crash, and the force of the collision sent my vehicle hurtling forward into the wreckage again. I was trapped in a pileup, but the sounds of the accident hadn't stopped. The fog obscured everything, but I could hear the unmistakable sounds of a chain reaction. More cars were colliding, one after another, in a gruesome domino effect. My heart pounded in my chest as I realized I was in the middle of a serial accident. Panic set in. I needed to get out of the car before another vehicle plowed into me. I fumbled with the seatbelt, my fingers trembling, finally managing to unbuckle it. The smell of gasoline filled my nostrils, and I could see smoke starting to rise from the hood. With a desperate shove, I managed to push the door open and stumbled out onto the cold night air. I could barely see a few feet in front of me, the fog thick and unyielding. The sounds of metal scraping against metal, glass shattering, horns blaring, and people shouting echoed around me. I moved away from my car, my legs unsteady. The fog disoriented everything, making it hard to tell where one car ended and another began. I looked around, trying to get my bearings. The scene was chaos. Vehicles piled on top of each other, some with their headlights still on, casting eerie beams of light through the fog. I turned back to look at my car, now a crumpled mess. The reality of the situation hit me like a sledgehammer. I had survived the initial crash, but I was far from safe. My mind was racing, trying to process what I needed to do next. I realized I had to keep moving, to find a safer place and call for rescue. After what felt like an eternity fumbling through the thick fog, I managed to find a spot a bit farther from the wreckage. I leaned against a tree, trying to steady my breathing. I knew I needed to stay calm, but my mind was racing with worst-case scenarios. The sounds of the crash were finally receding, replaced by eerie silence punctuated by distant cries and the occasional groan of metal. Now I needed to call for help. I reached for my phone, but then realized I had left it in my car. I cursed under my breath. There's no way I could come back and retrieve it now. I had to find another way to contact someone. Suddenly I heard a faint voice calling out, "Help! Somebody please help!" The voice was shaky, filled with fear and pain. I pushed myself away from the tree and started staggering towards the sound, my feet crunching over broken glass and debris. The fog disorienting me, making it hard to judge distance and direction. After a while, I found her, a woman trapped in her car, the front end crumpled like a soda can. She was struggling to free herself, her face pale and covered in blood. I rushed over and tried to open the car door, but it was jammed. I pulled with all my strength, my hand slipping on the wet metal, but it wouldn't budge. "Hold on," I said, trying to sound reassuring. "I'll get you out." I looked around, hoping to see someone, anyone, who could assist, but the fog was an impenetrable wall. I took a deep breath and returned to her. "We need to break the window," I said. "Cover your face." She nodded weakly, using her arms to shield herself. I picked up a rock from the side of the road and smashed it against the window. The glass shattered, and I reached in to unlock the door from the inside. With a lot of effort, I managed to pull her out. She was shaking, her breaths coming in quick, shallow gasps. "It's going to be okay," I lied, trying to keep my own panic at bay. We needed to get farther away from the crash site, but she could barely stand. I supported her weight and, half carrying, half dragging her away from the wreckage. We stumbled through the fog and found a small clearing where the fog was a bit thinner. I helped her sit down, leaning against a tree for support. Her breathing was shallow, and she was drifting in and out of consciousness. I had to keep her awake. "Stay with me," I urged, my voice shaky. "What's your name?" "Claire," she whispered. "I'm so scared." "Me too," I admitted, squeezing her hand. "But we're going to get through this." I wished I believed my own words. The eerie silence was occasionally broken by the distant sounds of sirens, but they seemed too far away to offer immediate hope. I asked for Claire's phone, and fortunately, it's in her pocket and still worked well. I immediately called 911, panically explained the situation. They calmed me down, saying that somebody else had reported about the serial accident, and the rescue squad was on their way. All we needed to do was wait. I looked around, straining to see through the fog. The road was eerily quiet now, the crashes having ceased. It felt like we were the only ones left in the world, trapped in this white void. Fatigue threatened to overtake me, and I had to fight to keep my eyes open. Suddenly, I heard a rustling sound, like something moving through the underbrush nearby. My heart skipped a beat. "Did you hear that?" I whispered to Claire, who nodded weakly. The noise grew louder, closer, and my mind raced with possibilities. An animal? Another person? Or something worse? A shadowy figure emerged from the fog, moving erratically. I couldn't make out any details, but it was coming towards us. "Who's there?" I called out, trying to keep my voice steady. No answer. My grip on Claire tightened as the figure drew closer. It stopped just a few feet away, standing still and silent. Its shadow was twisted and deformed. I couldn't figure out what it was. "Stay back!" I shouted, but the figure didn't move. The tension was unbearable, the silence deafening. Then, with a sudden lurch, it collapsed to the ground. I hesitated, then cautiously approached, my heart hammering in my chest. As I got closer, I realized it was another accident victim, badly injured and disoriented. "Help me," he groaned, his voice barely audible. I sighed in relief and knelt beside him, quickly assessing his condition. He was terribly hurt, but still alive. "Just hang on," I said, hoping to keep him conscious. The added responsibility was overwhelming, but I couldn't leave him. Time seemed to stretch endlessly. Claire was getting weaker, her responses slower. I tore a piece of my shirt and pressed it against the cut on her head, hoping to slow the bleeding. "Just hold on a little bit more," I whispered again. "Help is coming." In the distance, I finally saw a faint light. It bobbed up and down, growing brighter as it approached. "Over here!" I shouted, waving my arms. The light moved faster, and soon I saw a figure emerging from the fog, a flashlight in hand. Relief flooded over me. The rescuer reached us, a paramedic by the look of his uniform. "Are you two okay?" he asked, quickly assessing Claire's condition and noticing the other injured man. "They're both hurt badly," I said, my voice cracking. "We need to get them to a hospital immediately." He nodded and spoke into his radio, calling for more help. Within minutes, other rescuers arrived. They worked swiftly, tending to Claire and the injured man, guiding me towards the ambulance. As they lifted Claire and the man into the stretchers, I let out a long sigh of relief and pride. I had done everything I could to keep us alive, and now, finally, I made it. The dawn broke and the fog gradually lifted, both outside and within me. The fresh air filled my lungs, and for the first time in hours, I felt truly alive. I was on my usual route, a long stretch of highway that seemed to go on forever. The hum of the engine was almost soothing, a constant companion on my solitary drives. Nights like this were routine. Just me, the open road, and the cargo in the back. I had been a trucker for years, and I had grown accustomed to the long hours and the quiet solitude of the highway. This particular night, fatigue began to set in. The monotonous rhythm of the road was hypnotic, and my eyes grew heavy. I decided it was time to pull over and take a break. I spotted a rest area up ahead, a small clearing by the side of the road that offered a brief respite for weary travelers. I guided the truck off the highway and into the rest area, parking under a canopy of trees. As I turned off the engine, the silence was almost deafening. I stepped out of the cab, stretching my legs, and taking a deep breath of the cool night air. The stars were out in full force, their lighting flickering through the branches above. It was peaceful here, a stark contrast to the constant motion of the highway. I walked around the truck, checking the tires and making sure everything was in order. The stillness of the night was interrupted by the occasional rustle of leaves. Just as I was about to climb back into the cab for a quick nap, I heard it, a scream. It was distant but unmistakable, slicing through the silence like a knife. I froze, my heart pounding in my chest. The scream came again, more desperate this time. It was coming from the woods nearby. Instinctively, I grabbed my flashlight and my hunting knife from the glove compartment. I started towards the sound, leaving the safety of my truck behind. The beam of light cut through the darkness, revealing a narrow path leading into the trees. Each step felt like a journey into the unknown. The forest was dense and foreboding, the kind of place that seemed to swallow sound and light. I could feel my pulse quicken as I moved deeper into the woods, driven by the urgency of that haunting scream. The deeper I went, the more oppressive the darkness became. The flashlight's beam flickered as it passed over the twisted branches and dense underbrush. My senses were on high alert, every rustle and creak of the forest making my heart race. As I continued, the scream echoed in my mind, urging me to hurry. Suddenly, I stumbled upon a small clearing. My flashlight caught a glimpse of something on the ground. As I approached, my breath caught in my throat. Lying there, partially covered by leaves and dirt, was the body of a woman. Her eyes were wide open, frozen in a final expression of terror. Blood stained the ground around her. Obviously, she had been through hell. For a moment, I was paralyzed by the horror of what I was seeing. This wasn't just an accident. Someone had done this. The realization sent a chill down my spine. I knelt beside her, my hands shaking as I checked for any signs of life. But it was clear she was gone. My mind raced. Who was she? How did she end up here? And more importantly, where was the person responsible? I scanned the surrounding trees, half expecting to see someone watching me from the shadows, but there was nothing. Just the eerie silence of the forest. As I stood up, something caught my eye. A small trail of disturbed leaves and broken branches leading deeper into the woods. It was clear that someone had been dragged through here. My heart sank as I realized there might be someone else in danger. I tightened my grip on the knife and flashlight, determined to find whoever had done this. The trail was faint, but it was enough to follow. With each step, I felt the weight of the situation pressing down on me. This wasn't just about finding the source of the scream anymore. It was about stopping a monster before they could hurt anyone else. The further I went, the more signs of struggle I saw. Broken branches, trampled underbrush, and the occasional drop of blood marked the path. My mind replayed the scene over and over, the woman's terrified eyes haunting me. Finally, I came to another small clearing. In the center, a makeshift camp was set up, with a crude shelter made of branches and leaves, and there, huddled in a corner, was a little girl. She looked up at me with wide, tear-filled eyes, her face dirty and streaked with blood. My heart broke at the sight. She couldn't have been more than 7 or 8 years old. As I approached, she flinched, fear evident in every movement. I knelt down, trying to appear as non-threatening as possible. "Hey, it's okay. I'm here to help," I said softly, extending a hand towards hers. She hesitated, then slowly reached out to take my hand. But just as our fingers touched, her eyes suddenly widened, and she let out a blood-curdling scream. I spun around, barely dodging a sharp blade aimed at my shoulder. The knife grazed me, sending a searing pain through my arm. Standing there was a man, his eyes wild and crazed, with a twisted smile on his face. He was dirty and disheveled, his clothes torn and stained. He looked like he had been living in the woods for weeks, maybe months. His grip tightened around the knife as he lunged at me again, his movements erratic and violent. I dodged, adrenaline pumping through my veins. The girl's scream echoed in my ears, and I knew I had to protect her at all costs. The man slashed wildly, his eyes filled with a terrified madness. He seemed to take pleasure in the fear he was causing, his grin growing wider with each missed strike. I raised my own knife, ready to defend myself. The woods seemed to close in around us, the darkness amplifying the terror of the moment. This was no ordinary fight. It was a battle for survival against a deranged killer. I could barely catch my breath as I squared off against the maniac in front of me. The girl clung to my leg, her sobs muffled against my jeans. I needed to keep her safe and find a way to fend off this lunatic. The man circled us, his eyes gleaming with a twisted glee. He was playing with us, enjoying the fear he was causing. Every step he took, I matched, keeping the girl behind me and the knife ready. My mind raced, looking for any opportunity to get us out of this alive. Then he lunged at me again. I barely managed to deflect his attack. The clash of our knives echoed through the forest, a sharp reminder of the deadly stakes. His movements were erratic, driven by some dark impulse. "Why are you doing this?" I shouted, hoping to distract him even for a moment. He laughed, a chilling sound. "Because it's fun," he replied, his voice dripping with malice. The girl's grip tightened on my leg. I glanced around, looking for anything that could give me an advantage. The forest was dense, but I spotted a heavy branch lying on the ground a few feet away. It wasn't much, but it could work. I made a split-second decision. Feinting to the left, I threw my flashlight at him, aiming for his face. He instinctively raised his arm to block, giving me just enough time to grab the branch. With all my strength, I swung at his head. The branch connected with a sickening thud, and he staggered, momentarily dazed. But he recovered quickly, his eyes blazing with fury. He lunged at me again, and this time I aimed low, slashing at his thigh with my knife. He let out a howl of pain, dropping to one knee. Blood poured from the wound, giving us the moment we needed. "Run!" I yelled to the girl, pushing her ahead of me as I grabbed the flashlight. We rushed through the forest, the beam of light guiding our way. The man's enraged cries faded behind us, but I didn't dare slow down. My heart pounded as we stumbled onto a narrow path. I grabbed the girl's hand, pulling her along as fast as we could go. We needed to reach the truck, our only hope of escaping this nightmare. The adrenaline surged through me, pushing my tired muscles to keep moving. Branches whipped at our faces, and the forest seemed to close in around us. The flashlight flickered, but I kept it steady, illuminating our path. Finally, we broke through the tree line and saw my truck. I fumbled with the keys, adrenaline making my hands shake. We climbed in, and I locked the doors, starting the engine with a sense of urgency. The truck roared to life as we sped off down the highway, the nightmare fading into the distance behind us. "We're safe now," I said, glancing at the girl beside me. Her sobs had quieted, replaced by a look of exhausted relief. "We're going to be okay." The truck roared down the highway, the forest and its horrors fading behind us. The little girl beside me had finally stopped crying, but her face was still streaked with tears and dirt. The adrenaline was wearing off, and I could feel the exhaustion setting in, but I couldn't stop yet. We needed help. I grabbed my phone and dialed 911, keeping one eye on the road. Later, the distant wail of sirens eventually reached us, and the flashing lights appeared in the rearview mirror. I let out a sigh, knowing the nightmare was finally over. We had escaped the horrors of the forest, and the danger was behind us. As I pulled over and waited for the authorities, I thought about all the truckers out there on lonely highways. "Stay alert," I whispered to myself. "You never know what's lurking in the dark." It was a night like any other. I had just wrapped up a long day at work and was driving home, eager for some peace and quiet. The streets were dimly lit, and the city had an eerie stillness. My shortcut route took me through a less traveled part of town, known for its rough edges, but usually quiet at this hour. The radio played softly, a familiar tune that usually helped me unwind. But tonight, the music couldn't shake off this strange feeling. The buildings on either side loomed larger than usual. Their graffiti-covered walls almost seemed to be watching me. Trash littered the sidewalks, and a few homeless folk huddled in doorways, shadows amongst the shadows. There was something about the night that felt off, but I couldn't quite put my finger on it. I kept driving, trying to shake the unease creeping up my spine. Suddenly I heard a loud crash from somewhere nearby. My instincts told me to keep driving, but curiosity got the better of me. Slowly I moved forward, my eyes scanning the dark alleyways for any sign of trouble. That's when I saw them. A group of men, fists flying, locked in a brutal fight. My heart pounded as I realized what was happening. A gang brawl, right in front of me. Panic surged through me. I knew I had to get out of there fast. My eyes darted around, looking for an escape route. The main highway seemed 1,000,000 miles away. I took a deep breath, trying to stay calm, and pressed the gas pedal, hoping I could slip away unnoticed. The street ahead was dark and deserted, but I had to keep moving. Glancing in the rearview mirror, I saw the fight escalating, more men joining in, weapons flashing in the dim light. Suddenly, one of the gang members spotted my car. Our eyes locked for a split second, and I felt a jolt of fear. He shouted something to his crew, and before I knew it, they were running towards me. Panic gripped me. Desperation took over as I swerved onto a side street, tires screeching against the asphalt. But it was too late. They had already started to encircle my car, blocking my path. My mind raced as I tried to figure out what to do next. A large man with a bat approached my window, motioning me to roll it down. I hesitated, my hands shaking, but the look in his eyes told me I didn't have a choice. I cracked the window just enough to hear him. "What are you doing here?" he demanded, his voice dripping with menace. I'm just trying to get home," I stammered. But he didn't seem convinced and ordered me to get out of the car. Every instinct told me not to, but I knew I couldn't outrun them. Slowly I opened the door and stepped out, my legs trembling. The gang members closed in, forming a tight circle around me. My mind raced, trying to think of a way out, but every option seemed to lead to a dead end. Just then, a shout came from behind the group. Another gang member, seemingly higher in rank, pushed his way through. "What's going on here?" he barked. "This one's been snooping around," the man with the bat explained. The leader looked me up and down, then turned to his men. "Let him go. We've got bigger problems tonight." Before the gang retreated back to their fight, one of them leaned in close, his breath hot on my face. "Don't even think about calling the cops," he hissed. The threat hung in the air, heavy and menacing. I nodded quickly, my heart pounding. The gang members backed off, leaving me shaken and desperate to escape. I scrambled back into my car, slamming the door shut and locked it. My hands were trembling as I gripped the steering wheel, and I took a deep breath, trying to steady myself. I had to get out of there before anything else happened. My heart pounded as I sped down the dark, narrow streets, not daring to look back. The gang had let me go, but the fear of them changing their minds or another group finding me kept my foot pressed hard on the gas pedal. The labyrinth of streets seemed endless, each turn taking me deeper into the unknown. I glanced at my phone, hoping to use the GPS, but my battery was almost dead. The screen flickered, offering a momentary glimpse of the map before shutting off completely. I was on my own. Panic clawed at my chest, but I forced myself to stay focused. I had to keep moving, keep searching for an escape. Suddenly, I saw headlights in my rearview mirror. My stomach dropped as the lights grew closer, quickly closing the distance. My mind raced with possibilities. Was it another gang, or just someone else trying to get away? I couldn't take any chances. I made a sharp turn down a side street, hoping to lose them in the maze of alleys. The narrow street was filled with potholes and debris, making the drive even more treacherous. I swerved to avoid a pile of broken glass, nearly hitting a dumpster in the process. The headlights were still behind me, relentless. I pushed the car harder, praying it wouldn't give out on me. I spotted an alleyway to my right and made a split-second decision to turn into it. The alley was barely wide enough for my car, and the walls seemed to close in on me. I could hear the other car screech to a halt, unable to follow. Relief washed over me, but it was short-lived. The alley ended in a tall chain-link fence. My heart sank. I threw the car into reverse, backing out as quickly as I could. The car behind me was still there, its headlights blinding me. I had no choice but to face them. As I backed out of the alley, I braced myself for whatever was coming next. To my surprise, the car sped past me, its tires screeching as it took off down the street. It wasn't after me. I took a shaky breath, trying to calm my nerves. I had to find another way out. The main highway was my only hope. I scanned the area, looking for any sign that could guide me back to safety. As I drove back onto the main street, my heart still pounding, I felt a fleeting moment of relief. But it quickly vanished as I saw another group of gang members up ahead. They were blocking the road, and there was no way to turn back without risking another encounter. My only option was to go through them, hoping they wouldn't recognize my car from earlier. I slowed down, trying to appear as inconspicuous as possible. My hands trembled on the steering wheel as I inched closer. The gang members looked tense, their eyes scanning the street for any sign of trouble. I prayed that they would let me pass without incident. Just as I was about to reach them, one of the gang members stepped onto the road, waving for me to stop. My heart sank. I rolled down my window slightly, trying to keep my voice steady. "Hey, I'm just trying to get out of here," I said, hoping my calm tone would keep things from escalating. The guy peered into my car, his eyes narrowing. "You were at the fight earlier, weren't you?" he accused, his voice menacing. "Nah, man, I swear. I'm just trying to get home," I pleaded, my mind racing for a way out. He looked like he was about to say something else when another gang member shouted from behind him. "Cops are coming! We need to move!" The distraction was all I needed. I slammed my foot on the gas pedal, swerving around the guy in the street. The sudden movement took them by surprise, and I sped past them before they could react. I heard shouts and curses behind me. but I didn't dare look back. I raced down the street, my eyes scanning for any sign of highway. The sound of sirens grew louder, mingling with the pounding of my heart. I had to find an exit, and fast. Every second felt like an eternity as I pushed my car to its limits, desperate to escape the urban nightmare. Finally, I saw the familiar green sign for the highway. Relief washed over me as I veered onto the ramp. The gang and chaos of the city streets faded behind me. The hum of the highway was a welcome sound, a stark contrast to the madness I had just escaped. My hand still shook as I gripped the steering wheel, my mind replaying the night's events over and over. It felt surreal, like a twisted dream. I knew I had to call the police, but first, I needed to get somewhere safe, somewhere far from the nightmare I just lived through. As I drove home, the reality of what had happened began to sink in. I was lucky to be alive. The city had shown me its darkest side, and I had managed to escape. When I finally pulled into my driveway, I took a deep breath and promised myself I would never take that shortcut again. The mysterious gas station. I was driving down a lonely stretch of road late at night, with nothing but darkness on either side. The moon was hidden behind thick clouds, and the only company I had was the faint hum of my car engine. I had been driving for hours, lost in thought, when I glanced at my gas gauge and felt a jolt of panic. The needle was hovering just above empty. I cursed under my breath, realizing I had forgotten to check the gas before setting off. The idea of being stranded in the middle of nowhere with no one around sent a shiver down my spine. I strained my eyes out for any sign of civilization, hoping desperately for a gas station, or even a signpost. The minutes ticked by, and my anxiety grew with each passing mile. I began to doubt if I'd make it to a gas station in time. I constantly glanced at the fuel gauge, willing it not to dip any further. Gripping the steering wheel tightly, I tried to calm myself down. Just a few more miles, I thought. After all, I couldn't be the only person who ever traveled this road at night, right? But the longer I pressed on, the more my hope waned. Just then, I thought I'd have to pull over and wait for help. I saw a faint light in the distance. My heart leaped with joy, and I slammed on the accelerator. As I got closer, the light grew brighter, revealing itself to be a gas station. I let out a small, relieved smile. My heart rate began to slow down. Finally, I thought, I might just make it through this night. The gas station was old and run down, with a flickering neon sign that read open. It stood alone, seemingly appearing out of nowhere. The building was like a relic from another era, its paint peeling and windows clouded with grime. There was an unsettling stillness about this place, a sense of abandonment despite the lights being on. But what other choice did I have to be picky now? I pulled up to the pump, turned off the engine, then got out of the car and looked around. The place seemed deserted, but the lights were on, and the pumps appeared to be functional. I walked towards the small convenience store attached to the station, hoping to find someone inside. Through the dirty windows, I could see a figure standing behind the counter, motionless. I waved, trying to get their attention, but the person didn't respond. They just stood there, staring straight ahead. A chill ran down my spine, but I shook it off. Maybe they were just tired or didn't notice me. I returned to the pump and began filling up my tank. The nozzle clicked into place, and the gas started flowing. As I stood there, the sense of unease grew stronger. The station was too quiet, the kind of quiet that felt wrong. There were no crickets chirping, no rustling leaves, just an oppressive silence, broken only by the occasional buzz of the neon sign and the sound of fuel flowing into my tank. I glanced around, expecting to see another car or person, but there was nothing. Just me and the gas station in the middle of nowhere. The pump finally stopped, signaling that my tank was full. I replaced the nozzle and walked back to the store to pay. The figure behind the counter hadn't moved an inch. As I entered the store, a bell above the door jingled, but the sound seemed muted, only the faint smell of old coffee and stale air greeting me. "Hello?" I called out, my voice sounding small and hollow in the empty space. The attendant turned to face me, but didn't respond. His eyes were wide and unblinking, his mouth sealed shut as if glued or sewn together. They moved their hand in a gesture indicating the price on the register. I fumbled for my wallet, pulled out a bunch of cash, and handed it over. The man took it without a word, his eyes never leaving mine. I quickly turned and left the store, my heart pounding in my chest. As I got back into my car, I couldn't shake the image of the man's sealed mouth from my mind. I drove away, eager to put distance between myself and that unsettling place. I glanced at the clock on the dashboard. It was just past midnight. Looking up at the rearview mirror, the farther I got from the flickering light of the gas station, the more relieved I felt. Then, as I reached for my phone, my hand brushed against the empty pocket where my wallet should have been. It wasn't there. Panic set in as I patted all my pockets frantically. I even pulled the car over to the side of the road and searched the seats and the floor of my car. It was still nowhere to be found. A sudden, dreadful realization struck me. I must have dropped it back at the gas station in my haste to leave. My wallet had everything. My ID, credit cards, cash. There was no way I could continue without it. With a heavy sigh, I turned the car around and headed back towards the gas station. The drive felt longer this time, and the darkness seemed even more suffocating. A knot of dread formed in my stomach. The last thing I wanted was to return to that eerie place, but I had no choice. When I finally reached the gas station, I was shocked to see that it looked completely different. The lights were out, the sign was gone, and the building appeared even more dilapidated than before. I parked my car and stepped out, my heart pounding in my chest. I walked cautiously toward the station, my footsteps echoing loudly in the quiet night. The building seemed more decayed, with broken windows and ivy crawling up its walls. It was hard to believe that this was the same place I had just left a short while ago. I reached for the door of the convenience store and pushed it open, the hinges creaking loudly. Inside, the dim light was gone, replaced by an almost complete darkness. I pulled out my phone and turned on the flashlight, sweeping the beam across the room. Dust motes floated in the air, and shelves were empty, covered in a thick layer of dust. "Hello?" I called out, my voice trembling. There was no answer, and no sign of the attendant. I moved further inside. My pulse quickened. I needed to find my wallet quickly and get out of here. As I approached the counter, I saw something glinting on the floor. Bending down, I picked up my wallet, relief flooding through me. But as I stood up, I felt as if I was being watched, though I saw no one. I turned around, shining my flashlight into every corner of the room. Suddenly, the attendant lunged at me from the shadows. His eyes were wild and bulging, his face contorted in a look of sheer terror. His mouth was now wide open in a horrible shape, stretching far beyond what seemed humanly possible. But no sound came out. The edges of his lips were cracked and bleeding, and his teeth were jagged and uneven. The inside of his mouth was a gaping void, as if it led to some unknown abyss. I let out a terrified scream and stumbled backwards, almost falling on my butt. Without spending a second to steady myself, I bolted for the door, not daring to look back. As I burst outside, the cold night air hit me like a wave. I sprinted to my car, fumbled with the keys in my shaking hands. I could see the image of the attendant's horrifying face burning into my mind. Finally, I managed to unlock the car and dove inside, slamming the door shut behind me. I started the engine as fast as possible and sped away. My eyes darted to the gas station and the rearview mirror one last time. The attendant was nowhere to be seen. The building loomed ominously in the darkness, as if mocking me. What had I just experienced? What was that place? My mind reeled with 1,000 questions, but not a single answer. Deep down, I knew that I had encountered something otherworldly, something beyond my understanding, and I was so lucky to get out. Even years later, that memory still haunts me, and I never again forgot to check my gas tank before traveling at night.